picture this. You're walking in the woods alone, and then you come across something spooky. How bad would that be? You look down and you see an alien egg sac. But you look closer and you realize it's webs. It's not an alien egg sac, but it might be an egg sac. You lean even closer and you realize that web is moving. So if you get even closer, you can see that there's tiny little legs moving around in there. You've just found spiderlings. Well, tarantula slings to be exact. And you have a few options now that you've found this brood. You look around for the mommy spider and you see she's nowhere to be found. So you can A, leave them alone, B, let nature take its course, or you can smash them, or C, you can build your spider army. Choose wisely. We all know what you're going to choose. So here's a few tips and tricks on how to build your spider army. First off, you're going to need a good idea of the species. There's two separate species of tarantulas, arboreal and terrestrial. Arboreal tarantulas like humid temperatures and atmospheres, and they like to live in jungly type places. So they need enclosures that are a lot taller than terrestrial species. Terrestrial species like long areas to walk. They like to dig sometimes, and they prefer more hot, arid places like deserts or Arizona. And if you get an arboreal species, you need to know that humidity plays a big part in taking care of them. But what I'm going to go onto now is enclosures, because that is very important. Here we have an idea of an enclosure. Many tarantula keepers will keep slings, which are the baby spiders, in vials until they get to a certain point where they're a few inches long, and then they'll put them in mason jars, little plastic containers that are smaller than this, and that's until they just outgrow it and become big enough. And then a lot of keepers will actually keep their bigger tarantulas in things like this if they're an arboreal species, because arboreals prefer height. They need height to thrive. Terrestrial species, however, like sideways motions. They like to have a lot of length to walk around and stretch their legs. Now, many tarantulas are called pet rocks for a reason, and that's because they don't move much. But you will find that they need the space to thrive, really. Although you can keep them in some pretty small containers and they can be happy for their whole life. Next up, we should discuss food. I'm going to tell you all about how to gut load the feeder insects. Feeder insects are things like mealworms, crickets, roaches. I have a lot of experience with mealworms. I raised a colony for several years, and I never had to buy mealworms because they kept breeding and reproducing and doing their life cycle. And what you need to do for mealworms, you need a small container with a plastic lid. Poke holes in the lid for ventilation, they're good to go. Put substrate down, which can be oatmeal, or it can be cornmeal, or it can be breadcrumbs. Lots of different things can be used. Whole wheat flour can be used. And this is something that they're going to pee and poop in and even eat a little of, and it's kind of gross. That's why you need to change it every so often. You'll notice when it starts having a smell to it. You're going to need to gut load your feeder insects, which means feed them. So, when you get ready to feed your insects, before you feed them to your tarantula, you're going to need to cut them pretty thin. So just do a couple of these bad boys right now. And you'll see that these slices are pretty thin and small. And that's really all you gotta do. You don't even have to do that most of the time, but it helps them to eat it quicker and to reduce waste, you know. Because they will take care of it, but if they can't eat all of it, it will start to mold if you leave it in there, because sometimes they just can't finish it. So you need to work with them and not against them, and give them plenty to go off of, but not too much to go off of. Now the apples are a good point here, because they need both food and water, and they don't get their water source from water. You can buy things called cricket quenchers, and they are a gel type liquid thing, and it is water, but I find that they prefer to drink their water straight from food, like apples, celery, potatoes. So cut them up and keep one of those in there all the time for them. Now we'll move on to your spider's hydration. Never get a water dish. They need something very shallow like a bottle cap because they will drown. If you do decide to use a water dish that's a little less shallow than this, make sure you put rocks in the bottom or perhaps a sponge or something like that, and that will keep the spider from submerging his book lungs, which are what he breathes with, and they absorb water just like a book would. So you have to be very careful with that. With the arboreal species too, you need to worry about humidity, and a lot of that can be dealt with through substrate choices. The most favorite choice of substrate that I can suggest to anybody is cocoa fiber, and sometimes keepers will mix that with a little bit of vermiculite as long as it doesn't have pesticides in it. Always check for pesticides in your substrates. Despite the complexities of tarantulas themselves, taking care of their basic needs and functions isn't really that hard. Once you cover food, water, shelter, you've pretty much got all the bases met for them. So enjoy your spider army for the next 20 years while they just thrive. And I enjoy seeing your conquests.